American shoppers spent a record $9.8 billion online for Black Friday. It's a pretty positive sign for retailers facing pretty lackluster sales forecasts for the holiday season. But can the shopping frenzy last into Christmas? With me now, a fellow shopper, Bloomberg's Charlie Wells. Charlie, hello. Walk us through some of the data that we got. Of course, a lot of people were watching this as kind of a litmus test to see, is the consumer still consuming? Are they?
So right out the gate, it's looking pretty positive, right? So sales growth, up about 7.5% compared to last year. But last year was a really bad year. And I think this is one of the situations where good news out the gate actually could be bad news for retailers going forward. Adobe Analytics has been studying this, and they are actually projecting just about 5% growth this year, which of course is better than last year. But when you compare that to pre-pandemic, growth in 2019 in the holiday shopping season was 13%. So 5% to 13%. We're actually looking like potentially sluggish growth going forward this holiday season. And it's such a crucial time for retailers that there is some concern that this could actually be softer than they hope for.
We had the JCPenney CEO on last week as well, and he was kind of telling our very own Romaine Bostick that they're not talking about price hikes at all, even though they had major price hikes going into 2022. Do you see the retailers kind of winning out here with those margins, or are the consumers getting some pretty good deals?
Okay, so that's a really good question. I mean, we know that the consumer has been under a lot of strain with, inflation. I think that was a huge concern last holiday season. And I think they're really looking for big discounts. And I think, Bloomberg's retail team fanned out across the country to malls across the United States over this Black holiday season.
How do you get that assignment?
Yeah, that sounds really fun. But a lot of these consumers were disappointed by discounts. And I think that's something where, the consumer over the past few years, when there have been these inventory issues where retailers have had to kind of cut a lot of that stock that they just had from the supply chain era, I think we've trained consumers to expect big discounts. They're a little disappointed, but actually when you look at some of the numbers, Adobe is actually expecting discounts of 35% this year, and that is actually a record. So I think the consumer might come out ahead here.
Well, I think it's fascinating that we're talking about the consumer coming out ahead, because if you look at the foot traffic numbers, they were abysmal. Nobody's lining up anymore. No one's kind of tripping over themselves to get into the doors, but they are shopping online, to your point, that Adobe said. But does that work as kind of a macro recession indicator when it feels like a lot of the holiday shopping may still be dipping into savings?
Yeah, interesting point there. And just on the digital, it's really striking. Adobe actually found more people shopping on mobile than desktop, which is actually not something I would do. I feel a lot more confident shopping on desktop, but maybe I'm old school. But yes, I mean, this is the key thing that we're looking for here, right? Is the consumer going to keep buttressing the U.S. economy? Consumer spending in the United States accounts for 70% of GDP.
Yeah.
And the consumer really has been rescuing the U.S. economy. But as we see some of that foot traffic falling, I think the concern is, can online make up for this? I think, we'll see going into Christmas.
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's really interesting. And I can tell you're maybe not a couponer, Charlie.
Yeah, I'm not as organized as I should be on that front.
Me neither, to be fair. But I have to then ask, do we start to see this kind of spending frenzy get cut short at some point? Is this holiday season kind of the last hurdle? What do we think?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult. I think one thing that we actually have been seeing is some of this buy now, pay later popularity. And so that seems to indicate that potentially the consumer is actually under strain, right? Instead of using some of that pent-up cash savings that they had during the pandemic, are they having to effectively pay later? Are they using more credit cards? And I think when we looked at bank earnings in the third quarter, right, we saw a lot of an uptick in credit card spending. And so that seems to indicate that maybe the consumer just is not in as good of a position as they have been over the past few years.